My name is Ricarda, and from my earliest memories, I saw my parents shower my older brother Mason with endless attention and opportunities, while I stood in the shadows. The difference in how they treated us was anything but subtle. It was as clear as day. I remember sitting alone at our kitchen table doing homework while Mom and Dad drove Mason to his latest singing competition or club meeting. Mason was 3 years older than me, and somehow, that made him more deserving of everything. Whenever his teachers mentioned even the slightest talent, my parents swelled with pride. Mason has such a beautiful voice, Mom would boast to anyone willing to listen. One day, he's going to be something special. From an early age, I learned not to ask for much. When I expressed interest in taking art lessons, Mom just gave me an apologetic smile. Maybe next semester, sweetheart. Mason's singing lessons are taking up the budget right now, she said. The inequality became even more glaring when Mason was in his senior year of high school. I was 15, quietly sitting at dinner, when my parents made a big announcement. "We've been saving," Dad said proudly, "and we're going to send Mason to Preston College. It's one of the most prestigious schools in the state." Mason's eyes lit up. "That's really amazing," he exclaimed. "And there's more," Mom added. "You can stay in our apartment near campus. No rent, of course. We want you to focus on your studies." I pushed peas around my plate, trying to mask my disappointment, but they were all too focused on Mason's glowing face as he talked about his plans for the future. That night, lying in bed, I did the math. If they spent so much on Mason's education and provided him with free housing, there'd be no chance they could afford to send me to college. The realization hit hard, but instead of crying, I began to plan. The next day, I visited my grandparents' antique shop. Grandpa listened carefully as I explained my situation. "Ricarda," he said, studying me closely, "I could just give you the money for college." He paused, thoughtfully stroking his chin. "But I think it'll be better if you earn it yourself. Would you like to work here after school?" And that's how it started. While Mason packed for his prestigious academic adventure, I began working at the antique shop every day after school. I helped catalog items, assisted customers, and learned the basics of business from Grandpa. Grandma brought me snacks and told me stories about the vintage items we sold. Each day was filled with a sense of purpose and small discoveries. 3 years of working in my grandparents' antique shop flew by. Every day spent polishing old furniture and sorting through vintage jewelry turned out to be worthwhile. Years later, I look back on those moments with fondness. Those were the days when I first tasted independence and understood that success is built through hard work and self-belief. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved enough for college. There was no grand celebration, just a quiet dinner at home. But I didn't mind. I was proud of what I had achieved on my own. Enrolling in a local state college, I chose a practical business program that wouldn't drain my savings. The tuition was manageable, and I even had some money left for living expenses. I continued living at home, taking the bus to campus. It wasn't glamorous, but it made financial sense. One evening at dinner, I cautiously brought up the topic. "Mom, Dad, I think a used car would make my commute to classes much easier." Dad barely looked up from his phone. "Sorry, Ricarda, we just don't have the money for that right now," he replied. Mom, as if trying to soften the blow, added, "The bus is a good option. Lots of students use it." I bit my tongue, remembering how they had helped Mason get his driver's license and even pitched in to buy his first car. But that was a long time ago. Now I was on my own. My first year of college flew by, and just as I was wrapping up my spring finals, our house erupted with excitement. Mason had graduated from Preston College, and Mom and Dad threw him a meticulously planned celebration. It seemed like half the town had gathered to mark the occasion. Our home was packed with relatives, friends, and neighbors. I spent most of my time in the kitchen, preparing appetizers and serving drinks. The moment Mason entered the room, holding hands with a pretty blonde, the atmosphere grew even more electric. "We have some big news," he announced with a broad smile that immediately captured everyone's attention. "We're engaged." The room erupted in applause. Mom, crying tears of joy, rushed to embrace Sarah, while Dad clapped Mason on the back so hard it looked like he might topple over. But that wasn't all. Sarah, her voice as soft as silk, added, "After the wedding, we're moving to Connecticut. My parents own a successful business there, and they want us to take it over." Mom's tears turned into full-blown sobs. "My boy, a successful businessman. That's my son," Dad declared proudly, looking at Mason as if he had just conquered the world. I stood in the corner of the room, watching the scene unfold. No one even noticed that I had just completed my first year of college with a perfect 4.0 GPA, all while juggling part-time work at a local cafe. But I had grown used to it. The following year was entirely consumed with wedding preparations. Mom and Dad threw themselves into planning the perfect celebration for their perfect son. They took out a sizable loan to cover the cost of the venue, catering, flowers, and an orchestra. Everything was just right for Mason and Sarah. The wedding was a display of extravagance, a lavish venue, dazzling decor, heartfelt speeches, and dancing until dawn. It was all about Mason. I watched their glowing faces from one of the far tables. No one asked how my studies were going or how I was handling the workload. But I didn't complain. I knew my time would come. I stood in my bridesmaid's dress, which I had paid for myself, watching my parents. Their faces beamed with pride as they danced with the newlyweds. It was a triumphant moment, a celebration for the family. They spared no expense to give Mason and Sarah their fairy tale wedding, even though I knew it would take them years to pay off the loan. After Mason and Sarah left for Connecticut, I returned to my cramped bedroom in my parents' house. There, surrounded by my textbooks, an idea struck me. The apartment where Mason had lived during college was now empty. It was close to campus and could be my first step toward much-needed independence. That evening, I approached my parents, who were watching TV. "Mom, Dad, since Mason's apartment is vacant now, can I move in?" I asked, trying to hide my excitement. They exchanged strange glances. Finally, Mom replied, "All right, dear, you can move in, but you'll have to pay rent." Her words hit me like a slap. "Rent?" I repeated. "But Mason lived there for free." Dad shifted awkwardly in his chair. "That was different. We need to pay off the wedding loan, and the extra income will help." I couldn't believe my ears. "But I'm your daughter too," I said, my voice trembling. "I've never asked for anything. I earn my own college money, and I commute on the bus every day." Mom raised her hands to stop me. She and Dad exchanged one of those silent looks that always preceded their decisions. Finally, Mom said, "All right. We'll charge you half the usual rent." I knew it was the best offer I was going to get, so I reluctantly agreed. That weekend, I moved into the apartment that still bore Mason's traces. The walls had holes where his posters once hung, the coffee table was marked with rings from his cups, and a stack of books he had seemingly left behind lay in the corner, as if to remind me of his presence. To cover the rent, I picked up extra shifts at the cafe, often working until closing time. Between classes, work, and studying, I barely had time to sleep. My final year of college passed in a blur of textbooks, late-night shifts, and exhausting fatigue. Finally, graduation arrived. While my classmates and their families planned parties and celebrations, my parents opted for a quiet dinner at home. They invited only my grandparents, no extended family, no friends, no catering, nothing remotely resembling Mason's graduation festivities. We sat around the dining table eating lasagna I had cooked myself. Grandma reached across the table to take my hand. "Ricarda, dear, we're so proud of you," she said warmly. You graduated summa cum laude while working part-time. That's an incredible achievement. Before I could respond, Mom's phone buzzed. Her face lit up as she read the message. Oh, it's Mason, she exclaimed. He says everything's going great. The business is expanding, and they're opening 2 new branches. I watched as my graduation dinner turned into a celebration of Mason's success in Connecticut. My grandparents exchanged knowing looks, and Grandpa gently squeezed my shoulders. Their support was always quiet but profound, and in that moment, I felt their pride in me more deeply than words could express. My hard work in college paid off sooner than I expected. Just 2 weeks after graduation, I landed a position at one of the city's most prestigious firms, Anderson & Mitchell. My starting salary was higher than I'd ever dreamed, and I was eager to begin my career. But the excitement didn't last long. On my 3rd day, after my parents learned about my salary, Mom unexpectedly showed up at my apartment. Ricarda, she said, hugging me with a forced smile, now that you're earning good money, you should start paying full rent. I stared at her, stunned, not sure I'd heard correctly. But we agreed on half, I reminded her, hoping this was just a misunderstanding. Mom waved it off like it was insignificant. That was when you were a student. Now you can afford it. I wanted to point out that Mason had lived here rent-free, even after he started working. But I knew it was pointless. Comparisons to my brother never worked in my favor in our family. Realizing the apartment's location, just a 10-minute walk from my office, was too convenient to give up, I reluctantly agreed. Life settled into a routine. I worked hard, determined to prove my value at my new job. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, except for Mom's monthly calls. Ricarda, dear, she'd remind me, don't forget to pay the rent. We're counting on that money. 3 years passed this way. I earned several significant promotions and even became one of the company's key employees. But I had learned not to share these successes with my parents. Any hint of financial stability immediately led to new demands. Meanwhile, news about Mason and Sarah reached me only through social media. They had a baby boy, Tommy. I saw pictures of him but hadn't met them in person. Our communication had dwindled to occasional holiday greetings, and that suited me just fine. But one day, everything changed. Ricarda, Mom's voice was tense when she called me. We need to talk about your brother. I felt a weight settle in my chest. What happened? He's in trouble, she said, dragging out the words. The business, it's gone bankrupt. He had a falling out with Sarah's parents. They're furious about how he handled things. They're not speaking to him anymore. I closed my eyes, already anticipating where this conversation was headed. He's moving back home, Mom continued. With Sarah and Tommy. I see, I said cautiously. They'll be staying with you, she added sharply. In the apartment. Mom, this is my home. I've lived here for years, I said, trying to keep my anger in check. Don't be dramatic, Ricarda. Your brother needs help. He doesn't have any money right now, so he'll stay there rent-free. You can keep paying rent, we still count on that money. This is ridiculous, I replied, struggling to stay composed. If he's moving in, maybe I should look for a new place. How dare you? Her voice turned icy. We need that money more than ever. Mason is going through hard times. You wouldn't want to make things harder for him, would you? Without another word, I hung up. The moving day was worse than I imagined. Mason, Sarah, and their crying baby arrived with a mountain of luggage. Mom came along to supervise the process. Ricarda, clear out your things, she commanded, pointing to my bedroom. This will be Tommy's room now. I stared at them, struggling to process what was happening. My personal space was being turned into a repository for their problems, while my feelings were, as always, pushed aside. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, trying to absorb what was unfolding. This had been my sanctuary for years, my place of comfort and peace. But now Mom was methodically packing up my belongings and moving them to the living room. Where am I supposed to sleep? I asked, irritation creeping into my voice. There's a perfectly good sofa in the living room, she replied, already shuffling my boxes. You can't be serious, I protested, barely holding back my anger. I'm paying full rent, and you're putting me on the couch. Mom stopped and looked at me with a cold expression. Don't be selfish, Ricarda, she said. Your brother has a child. Children need proper rooms. I stood there helplessly as my bedroom was transformed into a nursery. A changing table, a crib, stacks of stuffed animals, and other baby essentials replaced my furniture. My things were unceremoniously dumped in the corner of the living room, which was now supposed to be my bedroom. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Mason spent his days wandering around the apartment, sullen and irritable, alternating between complaining about Sarah's family and reminiscing about his glory days as a successful businessman. Sarah either cried or argued with Mason about whose turn it was to change Tommy's diaper. Meanwhile, Tommy seemed to absorb the tension, crying incessantly. I came home after long days at work to find the sink full of dirty dishes, toys scattered everywhere, and a laundry basket overflowing with clothes. At first, I tried to ignore the mess, but the dirt attracted ants, and the chaos made it impossible to relax even in the living room, where I now slept. Eventually, I started cleaning up, washing dishes, picking up toys, doing laundry. Every meal I cooked mysteriously disappeared before I had the chance to eat it. One evening, after an especially grueling day at work, I decided to extend an olive branch. Mason, I began, trying to keep my tone calm, my company has a few job openings. I could put in a good word for you with HR. The benefits are great, and the starting salary is decent. Mason looked up from his phone, his face openly irritated. An entry-level position? Are you joking? He sneered. I'm a businessman, Ricarda. I don't do entry-level. I need a managerial role, something that matches my experience. I barely stifled a sarcastic laugh, but the words escaped before I could stop them. Your experience in running a business into bankruptcy. His face turned pale with anger. You don't know anything about what happened. It was my brother-in-law's fault. They set me up. With that, Mason stormed off to his room, the room that used to be mine. I stayed where I was, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. How much longer could I take this? It had been 3 months since Mason and his family moved in. I sat at the kitchen table, which was now covered in dried baby food stains from Tommy and coffee rings left by Sarah's cups, as I combed through my bank statements. The numbers didn't lie, my expenses had nearly doubled. The utility bills climbed higher each month. Grocery shopping had ballooned, as I was effectively feeding 3 additional people. Even incidental purchases, dish soap, new towels, were now my responsibility. Everything I had worked so hard to save over the years was slipping through my fingers. I stared at the piece of paper in front of me, and one truth became crystal clear: I couldn't keep living like this. It was the final straw. I couldn't endure it anymore. I needed to talk to my parents. All day, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would structure the conversation to stay calm and rational. When I finally made the call, it went exactly as I had expected. Mom, Dad, we need to talk about my living situation, I began, striving to sound confident. Mason and Sarah aren't paying for rent, food, or utilities. Everything is falling on me. They eat all my food, use the water and electricity, and I... Ricarda, Mom interrupted sharply. I can't believe how selfish you're being. Your brother has lost everything. His own in-laws turned their backs on him. He has a child to care for. You should be grateful you can help your family. At that moment, Dad's voice chimed in faintly in the background. You need to be more understanding, Ricarda. It's your duty to help your family. But I wasn't ready to back down. I am helping. I shot back. But there's a difference between helping and shouldering the entire financial burden. They're not buying groceries, they're not contributing anything. I'm paying for everything. Mom snapped, her tone growing even harsher. Your brother is going through a tough time. This isn't forever. He just needs time to get back on his feet. I realized any further argument would be pointless. That night, I sat down with my laptop and started looking for new places to live. I bookmarked several apartments, all within walking distance of my office. Just in case, I told myself. In case things get even worse. Exactly 2 weeks later, my fears were confirmed. I was sitting on the couch, trying to focus on work documents, while Mason and Sarah loudly argued for the 4th time that day. Their shouting was becoming unbearable when the doorbell rang. Before anyone could answer, my parents walked in, as if it were their own home. Mom wore that familiar expression she always had when announcing important news. Dad, as usual, stayed in the background, avoiding eye contact with me. Ricarda, we need to discuss the rent, Mom began ceremoniously. I jumped up from the couch, a wave of irritation rushing through me. I've already paid for this month, as always, on time. Is there a problem? Yes, but starting next month, we're doubling it, she said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The room fell silent. Even Tommy, who had been crying moments ago, stopped. I stared at Mom, convinced I'd misheard her. Doubling it? I repeated. But I'm already paying the full rate. Mom gestured around the apartment as though explaining something obvious. There are more people living here now. More wear and tear, higher utility bills. It's only fair. I couldn't help but laugh loudly. Fair? You think it's fair for me to pay double the rent for an apartment or I'm forced to sleep on the couch in the living room? If anyone should be paying more, it's Mason. Me? Mason shot up from his chair, his face flushed with indignation. This is ridiculous. I've lost everything, and now you want me to pay rent? Absolutely not. Mom patted him soothingly on the shoulder before turning to me with a frosty expression. Ricarda, she said sharply, you have a good job. You can afford this. Your brother needs time to get back on his feet. I glanced around the room. Mom's face was stern, full of expectation. Dad, as always, avoided my gaze. Mason looked insulted, as though I'd personally attacked him. And Sarah sat there with a smug expression, as if she'd just won the lottery. 3 months of pent-up frustration and exhaustion boiled inside me. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. But instead of letting my emotions take over, I forced myself to stay composed. Fine, I said quietly. Double rent starting next month. Mom smiled with satisfaction, as if she'd just closed a lucrative deal. She and Dad left shortly after, clearly pleased that their announcement had gone smoothly. It didn't even cross their minds that their actions had just pushed me to make a decision I had been postponing for too long. Later that evening, lying on my uncomfortable pull-out couch, I tried to focus on a book. But Mason and Sarah's voices drifted from the kitchen. They were clearly trying to whisper, but their excitement made them careless. Can you believe it? Sarah giggled. Your mom said they'd give us half the rent money every month. Of course, Mason replied smugly. They understand we need help right now. Ricarda earns plenty, she can support us for a while. It's perfect. Yeah, Sarah added, her delight unmistakable. We'll live here for free, and the extra money is like magic. And she doesn't even need to know about it. I lay there in the dark, gripping my books so tightly my knuckles turned white. All this time, I'd thought my parents were simply being unfair to me. But now it was clear, this was a deliberate scheme. They weren't just enabling Mason and Sarah to leech off me, they were actively facilitating it. Grabbing my laptop, I opened the bookmarked apartment listings. One option immediately caught my eye, a modern one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, just a few minutes' walk from my office. The rent matched what I was already paying before the proposed increase. Wasting no time, I called the number, speaking quietly to avoid drawing attention. "Hi," I began. "I'm interested in the apartment on Cedar Street." "Yes, I can come see it right now if that's possible." "Great. I'll be there in 15 minutes. When I arrived, the apartment was even better than I'd imagined. Spacious, bright, with new kitchen appliances, and completely Mason-free. I signed the lease on the spot, using my savings to cover the deposit. Returning to my old apartment, I waited until everyone was asleep and quietly began packing. 2 large suitcases held everything I needed. I left the furniture behind. It wasn't worth the hassle of moving, and besides, it carried too many unpleasant memories. The next morning, I rolled my suitcases to the door. Mason was sitting at the kitchen table, glued to his laptop, pretending to search for jobs he had no intention of applying for. "Going somewhere?" he asked without looking up. "Business trip," I lied smoothly. "Big project in Cincinnati." He grunted, quickly losing interest. That evening, I moved into my new apartment. After unpacking, I ordered takeout and sat on the floor of my empty living room. The silence was a balm to my soul. No crying baby, no bickering couple, no guilt planted by my parents. Just me and my newfound peace. Over the next month, I started a new chapter. I bought a comfortable bed, a cozy couch that didn't double as a bed, and new kitchenware. Everything in my kitchen stayed exactly where I put it. The food in my fridge remained untouched until I ate it. Each morning, I woke up in my own apartment, where every inch belonged to me. For the first time in years, I felt the freedom of making my own choices, the ease of living without being exploited, and the confidence that no one could take advantage of me anymore. I slept through the night, enjoying the rare luxury of uninterrupted rest. No Tommy's cries, no loud arguments, no unexpected knocks at the door. But, like clockwork, my phone rang in the morning. Mom's number flashed on the screen. "Ricarda," her voice was sharp as a knife. "Why didn't you send the full rent payment we agreed on?" "Double, remember?" I couldn't help but let out a short, bitter laugh. "Actually, Mom," I began, keeping my tone steady, "I know all about your little arrangement with Mason and Sarah. Were you ever going to tell me that half my rent money was going straight into their pockets?" Mom gasped. "That's none of your business," she snapped. "Your brother needed help." I cut her off, still smirking. What my brother needs is to grow up and take responsibility for once in his life. I've moved out. The apartment is all theirs now. Silence hung on the other end of the line. Then I heard Mom practically screech. "You can't do this. We need that rent money." "Well," I replied, "I'm sure Mason will finally start paying rent now that he's had plenty of time to get back on his feet. Can't wait to see how that works out for you." There was a long pause. I pictured the gears turning in Mom's head as she realized their reliable source of income had vanished. All they had left was an unemployed son who had never paid a bill in his life. "Ricarda, sweetheart," Mom's tone suddenly softened, almost syrupy. "Let's not rush into things. We can work something out. What if we go back to the original rent amount? That's fair, right?" I leaned back on my new couch, the one I chose myself, in my clean, quiet apartment where no one could take my space away from me. "No, Mom, that's not going to happen." "But, Ricarda, we're family. You can't just." "Family?" I interrupted. You call this family? Taking my money behind my back to give it to Mason? Kicking me out of my own bedroom while I paid all the bills? Treating me like an ATM while Mason is treated like royalty? Mom said something, but I wasn't listening. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up and, before I could second-guess myself, blocked both her and Dad's numbers. That was 6 months ago. Since then, my grandparents occasionally update me on what's happening, though I never ask. They seem to know I need to hear it. Apparently, Mason, Sarah, and Tommy are still living in the apartment. They haven't paid a single month's rent. Mom and Dad cover all the utilities, groceries, and even other necessities, because the baby deserves the best. Mason still hasn't found a job. Turns out, there aren't many openings for failed businessmen with a history of bankruptcy. Meanwhile, my new life has been a blessing. I've received another promotion at work, bought myself a car, and enrolled in evening classes to pursue an MBA. My apartment is always clean, my food stays in the fridge until I eat it, and I sleep soundly in my comfortable bed. Just the other day, I ran into Sarah's cousin at the grocery store. She smiled and casually mentioned that Mason and Sarah are expecting another child. Congratulations, I replied politely. Then I wished them all the best and walked away, knowing that somewhere across town, my parents were probably already figuring out how to pay for another crib. But that's no longer my problem. For the first time in my life, I've put myself first. And it feels absolutely right.